Hello and welcome, everybody. We are really sorry about the delay. So today, Techno Crime Fighters Forum 59 is being broadcast. I'm broadcasting it from a hiding location. I had to leave my flat, and some friends, family friends, were kind enough to take me in. So this is why I'm sitting here. It's a warm country, but it's not actually. I'm not actually on holiday, but that's why you can hear the dogs and the birds in the background. So sorry about that. But today we have a lot of news, so a lot of things have happened. Hopefully, but we have some news for you all around, actually, in all cases. And as always, we need your help and we need you to prepare your court case. How should we do it? Karen, would you like to start? Because you had some news as well. And then
yeah, I'll go into mine. It's going to be pretty quick, and then we go in depth into what you're doing and then what's going on with Romola, because that's pretty darn important. Yeah. As people know, I have an EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, lawsuit against NSA for firing me for daring to ask why was my work used to promote a woman who was sleeping her way through the Weapons and Space Directorate. So that was accepted by the EEOC in 2010, and they didn't get around to even looking at it until this last fall of 2017. And then the judge has just recently contacted my lawyer within the last week or so and said, well, I think after almost 10 years, I'm going to just dismiss her case because she failed to prove the people stalking her were actually NSA employees. Well, okay, here's a caveat. When I started taking down the license plate numbers, car makes and models, and getting images of these people, I took the ones that I saw parking in the NSA security parking lot to the Howard County Police in Maryland, okay? And I said, I'm being stalked and harassed illegally by my employer, NSA. These are NSA employees. Here are their images, cars, license plates. I want you to identify them to me, give me their names, and I want them investigated and prosecuted for stalking harassment. So Captain Daniel Kuhn of the Howard County Police got back to me a day or two later saying, we contacted NSA and they have forbidden us to investigate your case. Therefore, we will not be identifying these people to you because they said you are forbidden to identify national security personnel to her. So is that an admission of maybe who they were? But anyway, so that is part of the EEOC complaint, was that they obstructed justice. So years later, the judge says, I think I'm going to let NSA win the case by default because they obstructed justice and you were not able to get the names of the people that they had stalking you. So how much sense does that make? So my lawyer said to me, she said, this is ridiculous. She said, if I were you, I would definitely appeal. And that's what we're going to be doing. And that's another $2,500, but this can't stand. This is just ridiculous. You reward somebody for obstructing justice. You lose because the other people successfully obstructed justice. Okay, no, that's not a judicial system at all. So that's what's going on with me and the EEOC lawsuit. And I will thank the people who have helped me with it. I really appreciate it because I've gotten down to like $8 for the last week of the month or nothing for the last week of the month. I'm usually fine. And I've said, after all of this lawsuit business is over, I'm not going to be taking any type of, donations. And, but anyway, this has just kind of put my finances over the edge. And I do want to thank people for their generosity and for their caring. And again, I think this lawsuit is important in that if I can prove it, if I can win it, then the feds basically have them by the short hairs, because that will say the feds are stalking and harassing people, not just me, but this sets a precedent to say, if they did it to Karen, they're doing it to me. They're doing it to Joe. They're doing it to Susan, So that's why I think it's important. But we shall see, and I am going to appeal, and I'll let you know what happens. So that's what's going on with with my stuff, and I'll turn it back to Katherine to let you know what she's been doing. I'm very excited to hear that she is 99% finished with the template that I think is going to be a brilliant help to anyone and everyone in whether they take their lawsuit and do something pro se or whether they join a group like Targeted Justice. I think it's going to be a really good help. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen, and also apologies to everybody. Hello, I've just checked the video feed and I realized that the camera wasn't on me earlier when I spoke, so here I am. You can see the background. I hope it's not going to get dark very soon, or else you won't see me. But anyway, so I think this is really brilliant, and one of the things that you can do, Karen, is that you can.
Uh-oh, lost you. At least from my end. Oh boy. I don't know who's being broadcast at this point. I don't see Katherine at all. So, Oh, brother. Well, I'm going to start a little bit with Romola to give you an idea as to what is going on with her. She had gone to a school event where her daughter, her 13-year-old daughter, was going to be one of several students showcasing what they had done in certain projects. And of course, with her daughter being a straight A student, she expected to enjoy something very wonderful that a parent could enjoy. But while she was there, she was being targeted and hit by these lovely other parents. And
Hello. We had an interruption on this end. Hello, Karen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh,
Wow.
okay. Sorry. Okay, right. This is very interesting. There are two instances of me. One of them is me, and the other one is the previous session. Let me just see which one to eject. I think this one. Okay, so can you still hear me, Karen? Okay. So what happened at this end is that okay. An interruption of the electricity supply, so I was thrown. What I wanted to say, let me just briefly check if the streaming. Yes, the streaming is back. Okay, so people can hear me. Okay. So let's get back to where we were earlier before this interruption. You know, it's every single time something happens. It's always very interesting. But what I wanted to say is, let me share my screen, because what I have been doing is the following. People know that it was even back in October, the long form of the affidavit draft should have been finished. And I am ashamed to realize that it took me half a year where I didn't finish it. Well, this is due to all the insanity and the attacks and so on. However, now that I'm in hiding and I'm a bit better than I was in Zurich, I managed to get some work done on that. And the idea is the following. As I started writing up my case, I discovered just how extensive it is, just how much evidence there is, how many different types of attacks. And frankly, I mean, I've written a PhD, so I'm pretty used to working through a mass of information, but it's overwhelming me, okay? So I think a lot of people will find it just absolutely indigestible, insurmountable, and won't even get started. The entire point of combining our cases is to work around the problem that proving technology that has been classified for ages and is the product of 60 or more years of development, you know, in secret by the best scientists in the world, well, that's really hard. So we as victims cannot be expected to do the forensics ourselves, with the police not helping, with hospitals not helping, with Intel most certainly not helping, you know, apart from some white hat whistleblowers. So the entire point is to combine cases, and even where you cannot prove the exact mechanics of how it's being done, if you get enough people together who have never met each other before, who have no interest in lying for each other and so on, you can still prove that something is going on, you know, and it should stand up in a court of law, because it certainly stands up in science. This is how we do science, you know. I mean, if you like, physics and nature is totally classified, right? It's has been developed, you know, maybe over millennia or something, or it's just developed by nature and we don't know what it is, but we can still prove it. We can use statistics, we can use scientific analysis methods, but you need high enough statistics to prove certain things. So that is totally a valid method. And if it's valid in science, and it has to be accepted by the courts, because, you know, I mean, science is the ultimate test of, you know, our way of checking things. So the idea is the following. I would like to prove in a court of law as quickly as possible that certain types of attacks exist. I mean, gang stalking is a no-brainer because the Stasi did it, you know, the American intel services did it with COINTELPRO and so on. So even though the judges you know, sometimes pretend like they don't believe victims, it's fairly easy to prove gang stalking. However, things like voice to skull, or, you know, the covert implanting of body area networks, or even remote neural monitoring and synthetic telepathy and all this sort of stuff, it's very, very hard to prove. And my idea was to combine cases where all of us testify to certain effects that we observe, and we all observe them because the same type of attacks are being done to us. And if we testify to these observations, we don't have to be able to prove how the technology works exactly in greatest detail. You know, frankly, that is actually the job of the courts. They have to appoint an investigator. They have to use the funds of the government, you know, if they really want to have ultimate proof. And you know, by the way, the government knows exactly how it's done because they are doing it, you know, so they have access to all the classified technology. But anyway, so to break through this glass ceiling, if you like, this invisible damper on everybody's court case, I would like to combine cases so that we can actually prove certain things. Now, the way I first wanted to do it is that we all write notarized affidavits. And the first draft, let me show you, let me share my screen. And let me bring up the very first draft of the affidavit template, which was this thing. It looked such that, for example, for all the different types of, break-ins, we would all, maybe write a little paragraph explaining noise campaigns we suffered, sleep deprivation, or even stuff like, the pumping of noxious smells or gases into the home. This happens to an awful lot of people, by the way. So this is the section on housebreaking, for example, in this massive affidavit, the long form. But the long form of the affidavit is already 146 pages just with the different section headings. Okay. Now, I decided to write a shorter version where we don't write full sentences, but instead we use a kind of tick box exercise. Now, this is not ideal for court, but if we all get it right, it should still, help us to prove that stuff is happening. So it should help all the victims. So the new form, the short form of the affidavit looks like this. So this is the current version. Let me just make it big so you can see it. And it has a couple of, little features in it that should help us all. So like every affidavit, you have to write your name, and this paragraph, the first paragraph, has to be in it. Oops, sorry. Sorry, the very first paragraph where you say your name, your full address, and then you say, I state on oath, and say as follows: I make this affidavit based on my personal knowledge unless otherwise stated, and that the following facts and matters are accurate to the best of my knowledge. And at the very end of this document, so let me zoom out. So this is the first part, and the last page is basically where you get it notarized, okay? So it has up here a statement of truth. Sorry, let me show you. Let me show you. There. So, okay, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but at the very last page has basically a statement of truth, which you sign, and you sign it before somebody who is qualified to administer oaths. So you are kind of certifying your signature. Okay, this means you're notarizing this entire affidavit. Okay, so this last page is really important because as soon as you do that, okay, it can stand up in court. So that's the idea. Okay, so the core idea of what I'm presenting here stays the same. We are all writing affidavits and we all sign our name at the end and notarize it. We put our signature before somebody so that it can hold up in court. And what it does, it says that everything between your first statement and your signature is the truth to the best of your knowledge and belief. Okay, this is what counts, and this is what stands up in court. Now, the crucial bit is what's in between. A proper affidavit has to be numbered paragraphs, and you have to write full sentences and explain exactly what is happening to you. However, the typical witness or victim case will have gang stalking, break-ins, car sabotage, cyber hacking, remote neural monitoring, directed energy weapon attacks, maybe implants, nanotechnology, and so on. If you want to write all that down and include the evidence, it is a huge amount of work. It's basically like 2 PhDs, okay? Because you have to know about the technology to even understand how to express yourself to a judge. You have to do some forensics yourself because the police doesn't help, and so on and so on. I mean, this is too much for me, okay? It's let alone for somebody who hasn't, been writing and correcting PhDs. So this is just insurmountable as far as I can see. So the trick is now that we do not write full sentences. What we do instead is that we do a very quick tick box exercise, like this is the sort of type of offense, like gang stalking, like, unusual break-ins, or, unusual faults on your car or whatever, or cyber hacking. And we shorten this entire thing, and you just tick a box and you say, have you experienced it? And if you have experienced it, how often? Okay, is this something that happens weekly? Is it something that happens, you know, daily, or maybe it happened once or twice in your life? And the point is that if you go through every single offense, the shocking thing is that I will show you what the short version of the affidavit looks like. It's like a survey, like a tick box survey. But I, for one, can put a tick almost into every single box. And that already shows you the difference between a so-called normal person, if you like, and the real victim, because no normal person will within a lifetime experience countless cyber hacks, maybe have their bank card, you know, stolen, have their car sabotaged, gang stalking, find chips in themselves, and, you know, a myriad of other things. So that is the big difference. And any judge that sees, you know, a notarized statement saying, yes, I have experienced, you know, 4 break-ins into my home. Yes, I have experienced gang stalking, and so on, should be able to see that some big program is happening, you know, around the world. So that's the idea. But now let me show you the core of this document, because I would like everybody, I will release the final draft, but I would like everybody to have a good think about if this is what they would like to see, if there are ways to do it better or differently, and so on. So I hope you can read this. The short version of the affidavit, like this, looks as follows, okay? I want to be able to put it before a judge, but I also want to be able to show other parties like lawyers, doctors, if necessary, school teachers, or, you know, your friends and family, that something big is going on. So I was looking for a way to make it kind of private, but at the same time also be able to publish it, okay? And the solution I've came up with is that when you write your affidavit, every single one of us should pick an 8-digit code, okay? Every one of us picks 8 numbers at random, you know, and this will be your code that you have chosen yourself. And I ask you to write it on the top of the document, and also write it at the very bottom here in the footer, okay? And this means that every page will have this footer and will have your 8-digit document code. So you know it's your document, but no one else knows it's yours. And the point is that in this affidavit, I have separated out information with which you can be identified. For example, your passport photo, or, you know, details about your nationality, your age, or how many children you have, and are you married or not, and your qualifications. This is all private information with which you can be identified. But then, in terms of the targeting, you know, how many of your family members have been attacked, but totally anonymously, not naming names, or if you have been the victim of break-ins, or, you know, something like kidnapping or whatever you want, okay, that is fairly anonymous, because only the attackers themselves know, you know, who that person is, okay? So the entire point, actually, by the way, let me just check that you guys can see it. I'm not sure if people could actually see as I was explaining what I'm showing. I'm sorry. Okay. Yes, you can. You can. Okay. So the point is the following. Okay. So what I want to do is that this is an affidavit template, and I'm going to fill it out, and I'm going to put mine public because I'm, you know, my entire case is known. You don't have to do the same. You don't have to make the entire affidavit public. You can use this affidavit template yourself in private for your own court cases, for your own community, whatever you want. But should you send it to the joint investigation team, okay, what I ask you to do is to give me permission to publish the anonymous part, okay? And the anonymous part is just a tick box exercise that says, yes, I've experienced break-ins, yes, I've experienced this, and this, but it doesn't have your name on, okay? And my idea is that we take all these tick box parts and we put them up on a website so that people can see just how widespread these offenses are, okay? That's the idea. And only you know that the code that appears at the bottom of the page is yours, and the beginning of your PDF and the end of the PDF will not appear. It's just the, you know, the anonymous part of this. So that's the idea, okay? That's the idea behind the entire thing. And now let me go into detail, because what I have now done to set this up is, if I just scan through briefly, okay, at the very beginning, okay, this is just the first sentence that's, you know, saying that what follows is the truth. Then there's one paragraph where, you know, this is the permissions for the use of this affidavit, which is exactly what I explained. But then again, having said that, you don't actually have to send this affidavit to me, okay? I'm going to publish the actual open office document. You can take out the permissions of use and you can use it in another way. You can still use the same template, okay? So this is totally public. Then should you send it to the joint investigation team, I do ask you to include a photograph. And if you give permission that I, for one, can use it for my court case to prove that targeting happens, I also ask you to send me a copy of your passport, but you can block out the actual serial number of your passport. But in Europe, most court cases require that any witness who is providing supporting evidence can be identified, you know, so that the court can check that you're not just making it up. But if you use the affidavit template yourself, even that's not mandatory. Then this is the section of, on private information. This is just very, very basic, so that, and basically just used for statistical analysis, you know, which nationalities, are there any specific nationalities that are being targeted, or particular ages and so on. And then this is now the public part of the affidavit. And there's some general targeting information, some, you know, other stuff that have you been the victim of classical crime. But the main part of the affidavit that's specific to, specific to targeting, hang on, let me just zoom out, is the following, not this one, this is the private part. It's this bit, okay? So the way I set it up now, this is the tick box exercise, is that it's split into different sections, okay? And within every section, like intrusive surveillance, you have different types, like the bugging of your home, the office, or the car, bugging of telecommunication, very intrusive video and radar surveillance, and so on. And then on this side, in these columns, you state when did it start, like you say the month. It started in October of 2001. And then the next bit indicates how frequent it is, you know. Has this happened all the time? Has it just happened, you know, monthly, that you found your telecommunication bugged, say, or has it just occurred twice? You know, let's say this one just occurred twice. And then the final section is evidence. Do you have evidence or do you not have evidence? And should you have evidence for the bugging of your home, say because you found the bug, you just put an X, okay? And that's it. That's how it goes. But the idea is that when we go through all the different offenses, you know, the neighbors, were the neighbors involved? Have you been the victim of stalking? Have you been the victim of other stuff, you know, landlords? These are all the different topics that I have listed in the long form of the affidavit. But the point is that when we combine many, many different affidavits, and you can see just, you know, the typical affidavit would look something like this, you know, just X's absolutely everywhere. You can just see that all these victim cases are pretty much the same thing, okay? And the big advantage now is that for every single section, you don't have to write a paragraph. You can just put an X, you know, in the right category. And the most important thing is really that we all agree on the numbering. Okay, so section 7.3 in these affidavits is, for example, a break-in where they damaged and changed your clothes. That happens all the time, you know, by the way. And this way, we can put all these different forms in front of a judge and say, look, this is all the same. The same type of offenses are happening to many, many different people. Okay, so this is the idea behind it. And it's a very, very quick exercise, much quicker than the long form of the affidavit. And what has been now included in the affidavit draft is pretty much what was in the long form. Okay, so we have, we have, for example, stalking, we have, attacks when you're driving your car or sabotage to your car. We have attacks on you when you're traveling, hacking, banking, online banking, insurance fraud even, sexual assault, damage to your business, and, okay? Attacks on your children, a long section on directed energy weapon attacks, and so on. Okay, so this is the idea, and what I will do is I will finish it off. There are just a few more things that I have to do. One of the things I have to still finish off is write a glossary, okay? Because if we are all writing a notarized affidavit that these types of offenses have happened to us, then we all have to agree on what these different terms mean. So I have to define what does gang stalking mean. I have to define what does, remote neural monitoring and so on mean, in a way that we can all kind of, agree that we mean the same sort of stuff. So that's the idea, and this is what I was working on. And long term, the idea is that hopefully, if people like this idea, I would say, well, I'm certainly preparing my court case in the UK courts. And if people like the idea, I invite them to also send these short versions of the affidavit to me as to support my court case, maybe also to support Karen's court case if she's interested, maybe Millicent's. So inside the affidavit draft, the standard form of the permissions is that you give the members of the joint investigation team permission to read your affidavit, to use it fully in their court cases, and also that we look at the information and we publish anonymized reports, okay? That kind of allow us to say more broadly, say in what countries these attacks are happening and how victims are being attacked. So that's the entire idea. And then there's one more clause inside the permissions, and that is you can, if you give, so as I said, you do not have to send your affidavit to us. You can still use the affidavit template for your own purposes, and you don't have to send us anything. This is just a free service. The entire idea is that the community agrees on maybe summarizing the offenses in this sort of way, if you find it convenient. Should you send it to us, I've also included a clause that we might want to consult other experts, okay? For example, Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe did a survey on this, and I think it would be convenient if we can, maybe consult them or show them the results. So it has a clause that, should we make this information available to people, it would only be trusted experts, and it's only trusted experts where the 5 members of the joint investigation team unanimously agree that they are trustworthy. Okay, so I think with Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, that's a given. We all trust them. But maybe there are other experts who come along, maybe some microwave weapon experts. And, if we all agree that they are trustworthy, we can show them, look, this is what people have written in the affidavits. Can you maybe give us a tip of how to measure the technology that might be behind this and this sort of stuff? So that's the kind of little caveats that I put in. But the standard is that the big picture is that only we read your affidavit, and we don't make it available to absolutely anybody at all. It's just us, and it's just for us to analyze this and to publish reports. Okay, so within the caveat that all of our computers are hacked by the intel agencies anyway, that apart, it should be just us who actually read this affidavit. We keep it confidential. And then beyond that, I just ask you to give us permission, to publish the middle bit of the affidavit so that we can show the world just how prevalent these attacks are. So that's the idea. And the time scale is that hopefully tonight I have this thing finally finished, the short version, and I will make it public so that you guys can have a look. You can comment, you can tell me if you like it or not. And then I will consult over the next couple of days with a few more legal experts to make sure that the entire format, the way I've drafted it, is okay. And if that's done, then hopefully at the start of next week, we can all start, writing our short affidavits. That's the idea. And when we have enough affidavits together, I certainly would like to take some into court to prove my own case. And I'm seriously, I really think we have to get to court as quickly as possible, because the big picture is that the attacks are getting ever more brutal, ever more egregious, and ever more violent, you know. So I really think that the courts are the only civilized option we have to put a stop to this. So yeah. I can't hear you, Karen, because I think your microphone is off. Oh dear, I can't hear you. Hang on, let me see if I can. Okay, I think Karen is trying to reconnect. Okay, so right now, at the moment, unfortunately, I cannot see Karen and I cannot hear her. So let me just throw a quick glance at the chat. Okay, do you guys have any in the chat while we are waiting for Karen to come back? Do you guys have any questions regarding? I'm just scrolling through the chat, and I've seen that somebody mentioned Dr. Barry Tra. He's the UK microwave weapon expert, and yes, he's one of those people that I would like to have. I would like to consult about these things, and I would like to give him access to these sort of files. But as I said, if we you know, we can have a sort of format of this where we are sorry, a small disturbance. We can have a sort of format where we are you know, we can just take the middle bit out, and we can just you know, pass that to experts and so on. One of the things I would like to include in these affidavit templates is, at the very end, I do want people to have the opportunity to list their perpetrators. Okay, so while I think every victim has a right to privacy, I don't think that criminals and war criminals have a right to privacy, given what they have done, you know, to people on a large scale. And I want victims to be able to list absolutely everybody who has committed offenses against them. And for this reason, this affidavit draft does at the end have a list where you can just write down all the perpetrators. So this could be people who have stalked you, who you might recognize. This could be people who actually attacked you, assaulted you, and so on and so on. And oh, Karen is back. Let's see if we can. Hello?
Yes. Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can't see you yet, but I can hear you.
Oh, well, maybe that's a blessing. Oh, dear. Let's hit all kinds of buttons here and hope something works.
Yes, now I can see you. Now I can see you. I was just, while you were away, I was just filling in, and I was saying that the last bit of the affidavit draft has the a section where people can write down a list of all the perpetrators that have committed offenses against them. So you know, that's
excellent.
But that is part of the private part of this affidavit. So you know, I think, but I think it is important, and that's also how I feel. I mean, I'm as you know, nervous about being done in as any other victim, and I think it is very important that people have a way to write down that these are the people, you know, the dying declaration we were thinking about. These are the people who have committed offenses against me. Here's my, you know, I notarized this. This is a notarized affidavit. You know, even if I can't make it to court, there's somewhere a written record of all the perpetrators, you know, in the background.
Right, and it is kind of a dying declaration, because if you are a healthy person and all of a sudden you turn up with bleeding in the brain or heart damage or other anomalies with your red blood cells that have never been there before, you are in the process of being murdered, and that's a valid statement, you know.
Absolutely. And I have to say that you know, the attacks that we all have suffered is I mean, Millicent has been extremely hard hit. And and then also Ramola, who's not here today, but also Melanie. And I know that you're being hit really hard as well, Karen. And and there are victims out there who are being hit even harder than us. So I want them all to have the opportunity to name their perpetrators. And then I think also what's also true, based on what I have seen, is that there is a very large white hat effort where people do take the information, they do go after people, and they do covert investigations against these people, even if it's not visible to us immediately.
Well, I take solace in looking at certain things on the internet. I mean, you can't believe the mainstream media at all, so it's like being in the old Soviet Union, where you have to kind of look at, see what they're saying, what is it they're not saying, and read in between the lines. But it does look like there are things going on behind the scenes, and that the rogue government and the legitimate government are indeed at war. And I've told people before, look, this cannot really be published. First of all, the mainstream media would lie about it, so what's the point? But people in the street would panic. You'd have all kinds of violence, and you might have one side, you're not going to tell us that our beloved leaders are pedophiles and this type of thing, because they just don't want to hear it, because, and this goes to ego, because if you have followed or even worshipped a leader, and that leader turns out to be a degenerate beyond what you can imagine, then what does it say about you? So people are going to reject that based on their own egos. I can't be so stupid as to have been fooled. Well, yes, you were. So this has to go on behind the scenes, and the evidence has to be gathered, and cases have to be made before it's announced, hey, we just arrested half the government, and this is why. Because you better believe that you have to show why, and have the proof to tell people why their governor, why their senator, why their congressman, they're headed to prison, So to avoid a civil war, you've got to take it slowly. The logistics must be a nightmare. But you have to take it slowly, be very careful, and get all of your facts together, not only for court, but for the court of public opinion, so you don't have a civil war. So, people are saying, why is it taking so long? That's why it's taking so long. Because otherwise, any or all countries could be thrown into absolute chaos. And do you want to live in Venezuela? Because that's about what you would have if things went into the toilet, basically. So I do take hope from the bits and pieces that I can put together from various people reporting on the internet. And no, it's not the best source of information, but it's the only source of information that has bits and pieces of truth, because the mainstream media is just doing a whitewash, So, like I said, I tell people I'm not somebody to give false hope. I have it myself. I have the hope that this is coming to an end, but we have to do our part. And I think that this tick box approach is brilliant, because so many people are so traumatized, they're not going to be able to sit down and write what happened to them. They need to be heard, but they're not going to be able to do it, So this is the way for them to be heard, and it is the preponderance of evidence from people all over the country, all over the world, saying this, and this are happening. And if I have 8 things in common with the guy in Zimbabwe, and the woman in India, and the other woman in Scandinavia, and then the person in Uruguay, something's going on. And no judge worth anything is going to dismiss it. He can't, because he'll be ruined, and they'll just give it to another judge. So like I said, to me, it's very exciting. And I'm certainly glad that you've done it. And it has to be at least 2 PhDs, So I credit you with that it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant to put the story together in such a way. And I personally appreciate it. And I think you and I and Romola will probably make our testimonials and things like that more or less public to be used for anybody's court case, with the private parts, like you were talking about, only being for the court, not for being published like Joe Smith was part of this, that's for the court. That's not for, the public. But I would be more than happy to share mine and share being an expert witness in that. I know that the feds were doing it because they did it to me. So I'm more than happy to share that. And I'm sure people who even just want to go it alone, you'll have a group of people who give you their affidavits, and you can use us as a basis for saying it happened to these people, it's happening to me. So if you don't want to be part of a class action, you want to go it yourself, wonderful, be my guest. You know, I'm still willing to help, as are so many other people. Just, you know, take our information, run, good luck, you know.
Absolutely. And I think what's really important is that we all, and this is why I make this public and I invite comments, you know, is if you want to use the statements of other people, you have to know what you would like them to testify to, you know, what sort of evidence, what sort of support you need. And that's why I ask everybody to read this really carefully and think about, in a court of law, what type of attacks would you like to prove, you know? Because the affidavit template or the survey of these affidavits needs to have a question about that. You know, chances are many people have suffered exactly the same. But if you want to prove that in a court of law without having maybe enough evidence because it was classified technology, then this question has to be in there. You know, it has to be part of the affidavit template. And that's also the reason why I made one bit, you know, such that it can be publicized without compromising anybody's privacy, because we do need to certify what is happening to each other. So I really think that part of the affidavits have to be just published, you know, and I'm certainly going to publish mine. Yes, but this is basically why it's not just enough that I do this work, but everybody in the community has to help to make it work, because only if you put in your comments is the affidavit template going to be useful to the entire community, you know. So I will be sending around this whole thing on Twitter when it's finished, okay? And I'll put it up on my website. And then I really, really encourage everybody to take the time and comment and send the comments back to me, you know? So, okay, so as I said, you know, I after the show, I will sit down and I'll do the work and, you know, get it finished. Then the other thing that we wanted to say is that there are some other news. So Millicent is now out of the hospital. Hopefully she can perhaps join us in the second half. That would be really great. And then the other thing is, I guess Ramola, her case was absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking, and it's unfortunately she can't be here to talk about the case herself, because only she can do it justice. But in a nutshell, what has happened is that there was a school open day, or a day for the parents, as I understood, and Ramola was brutally attacked, extremely viciously in the school, and she had also indication that children were using their mobile phones to either set off her chips or to actually use them as directed energy weapons on her. This is something that I certainly have seen myself. In fact, I have witnessed how German intelligence in Pullach is training up children in schools how to do gang stalking and how to trigger weapons. So this is something I have seen myself with my own eyes. And on that note, I also would like to point out that the new building of German intelligence, the Bundesnachrichtendienst in Berlin, has an entire boarding school on their site. Okay, now you can think about what exactly does German intelligence need a boarding school for, you know? And to me, that smacks of MK Ultra, to be honest. And based on what I have seen, you know, what they do with children, and I'm talking really children, very young children, I think this is something that's of concern, you know.
I can't hear you anymore.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. There was some background noise.
Okay.
So what happened is that Ramola went to the school principal and she reported that she was being attacked. And then I think the school principal made a call to what's it called? It's not called Child Protective Services in the US. It's called the Department for Children and Families or something like that.
And his name is Cristofano, I believe, Principal Cristofano, and then the Vice Principal Susan. And I can't look up at the name right now, but they decided, since what Ramola was saying was so over their heads, that she must be crazy. And it's like, okay, stupid people don't get to make that decision. You know, that's why we train psychiatrists and psychologists. and so that we don't have the janitor tell us, I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm going to report you as being crazy. I'm sorry, is this a society where stupid people rule? We have to bring it all down to their level, or else we're going to basically risk being put in an asylum. You didn't dumb down enough your comments to these people, so we're going to put you away and retrain you to talk stupid. So that's the crux of the whole thing. I mean, she was outraged because she was hurt. She was driven away from the school before she could see what her daughter was showcasing for her accomplishments. She had to take the family car and go and leave the school because people so viciously attacked her. What is wrong with Quincy, Massachusetts? This is sport. Why don't you just drag people in the street in back of a car with a rope tied around their legs? I mean, what is wrong with Quincy, Massachusetts? I mean, in one breath, I think it was either the principal or the vice principal said, she's an accomplished journalist and writer and she's crazy. It's like, wait a minute. Are you so very stupid that you can't see, you cannot be an accomplished writer, book publisher, and be crazy? You can't do that, So it's like saying that a midget was a wonderful basketball player. No, I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way, But again, you're looking at people so very stupid that they don't even hear what they're saying, that it's so contradictory, and they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the intellect to declare anybody crazy. I mean, where's the hospital? It says, here's the form to fill out how very stupid that you are, and then fill out how very smart that the person you're saying is crazy is. So you with the 90 IQ get to call anybody with 160 or 70 IQ crazy because I can't understand them. Is that really the measure that we use to put people in institutions? So what's going on with Romola is, she's up against probably some of the dumbest people you'll ever meet. And I'm so sorry they have anything to do with the school. Oh, for Pete's sake, the school, are you kidding me? I would say all these people need to step down, and maybe the janitor needs to take their place. The cooks and the janitor probably have a higher IQ than these people. So it's insulting, it's ridiculous, and it's basically wasting her time. And they're basically saying Romola is so smart that we're concerned that her child will become smart too. She's a terrible influence on her child because her child probably is not going to be able to grow up and speak stupid very well. So we're concerned she won't fit into society, especially in Quincy.
I think, Karen, you have put your finger right on the issue, as always. I think that's exactly the problem because, I have heard from Romola that, her daughter isn't just good at school, she excels, she really excels. And I think that is the problem, that her daughter's excellent at maths. And what Romola has experienced, with the school principal turning instantly stupid is what I call the instant moron effect. And I have seen the instant moron effect in action many, many times. I've even seen it in the Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland, when I analyzed the throat implant of Melanie, and the lead researcher turned instantly stupid despite his PhD, and suddenly couldn't see that titanium fibers are, not of biological origin in a body. So the instant moron effect is very prevalent when you somehow bring people in contact with covert military plans or covert intel action. Then people magically turn stupid, and I think. In the case of Romola's school, so what Romola has told me leading up to the case makes me believe that we can't even apply these mitigating circumstances to the school principal, that he suffered from the instant moron effect. I think there's something much, much darker happening at that school, and that's not surprising entirely, because Millicent, for example, has been reporting the Mount Pleasant school being taken over by these Illuminati criminals, and even the school awning that was put up, being in the shape of the Air Force logo, with a military cemetery, with crosses in a row on top of the awning, pretty much spelling out that these children are very likely going to be used in a terminal program funded by the Air Force, and she explained how the psychopath and very likely serial killer Randall Webster is involved big time in a reading program, as far as I remember. So something much, much darker is happening in American schools. And in the case of the Quincy school, Ramola has reported a lot of cartel signaling. So she was saying that there's a lot of Illuminati signaling, a lot of owls, which traditionally are a sign of wisdom, but in the in the Illuminati crime cartel world, are a sign for Moloch, and a sign for the sacrifice and the murder of people, including children, especially children. And she reported the Crime Corporation logo. She reported a lot of this sort of covert cartel signaling being plastered across the school. And it all seemed to have a certain system. So that was the first thing that Ramola noticed. It was actually the cartel signaling. Then she noticed being physically attacked by other parents and by people who look like they are FBI and have been infiltrating the school. And then she also reported being attacked by children. So put all of this taken together, to me, shows that the school has been taken over by the crime cartel connected to this, international organized crime ring connected to the Crown Corporation, which explains everything in one go. It explains the cartel signaling. It explains the recruitment of children for this sort of stuff. So I think what's happening in Quincy is much, much bigger than the principal being just instantly stupid. But it is a telltale sign of the operation of the crime cartel that people in leading positions turn instantly stupid. That has also happened at Hospital Erasmus in Brussels. And on that note, I remind people that Melanie's daughter has been kidnapped by Hospital Erasmus in Brussels, and she still doesn't have her daughter back. And what I witnessed there myself is an entire intel operation / crime cartel operation in action, where several people ganged up, and it was almost like not quite dominoes, but it was kind of like the pass the bucket sort of, black ops type of operation that ended up with Melanie having her daughter taken away. And Melanie didn't even do anything wrong. I was talking to the midwife about the fact that Melanie, who had a big scar on her throat that could be seen by all the doctors, still had a bit of the implant in her throat that was obstructing her air pipe. And I said that she has an implant and that people need to watch out for that during the cesarean section. And based on that, Melanie was sectioned and locked up in psychiatry. Now, this was despite the fact that there were 2 witnesses who testified to Melanie's sanity. She had psychiatric reports. I was there as the scientist who actually analyzed the synthetic throat implant at the Palshira Institute, and we were all ignored. So one can either say all these doctors suffered from the instant moron effect, or one has to more realistically say, no, all these doctors are actually part of a crime ring. And it was very well-oiled machinery that led to the kidnapping of a child. And to me, that smacks of a very well-oiled team that is, I would guess, perhaps connected to the child trafficking rings that are operational in Brussels. Okay, so I think this is what we have to look for. So the truth is, in my view, that what Ramola is up against is not just a moronic school principal, but she's up against the big child trafficking operation that is running rampant in America and in Europe, and is now operational in the Quincy school. So if any of the parents of the other Quincy school children hear this, I really encourage them to follow Ramola's case closely and support Ramola, because chances are their children are being trafficked. And one of the things that people forget is that when you're somewhere in an open space and you're being attacked with a directed energy weapon, there's first of all backscatter from anything metallic that you might have, like a belt buckle or even the mobile phone in your pocket that has metal in it and so on. So there's backscatter, but also the shots are not necessarily perfect. So you're always hitting other people, always. And then any sort of scattered radiation scatters back, reflects back from walls and so on. So in any closed environment or in any area where directed energy weapons are being used, everybody is being irradiated by these cancer weapons, okay? Now, as Dr. Barry Trow pointed out, children are particularly affected because children are small and don't have that much body mass. And out of children, female children are even worse affected because all the egg cells are already formed at birth, okay? So it means that any DNA damage to the egg cells will damage the female line forever after, okay? The entire female line will be damaged. So the mere production of these directed energy weapons is a crime against humanity, because there's no safe way to operate directed energy weapons. It is physically impossible. And add to that the fact that a lot of directed energy weapons are highly collimated and emit very focused pulses. And electromagnetic radiation has, in itself an infinite range, which is why we can see the light from stars, And what you have is a weapon that has an infinite range and can cause damage in a, in a way that's not really controllable. That's the problem. So when Ramola reported that directed energy weapons were used on her at the school, what this means to all the other school parents at that Quincy school is that, oh dear, my child is being irradiated with cancer weapons in a way that damages especially female children permanently. Okay, so that is what we're really fighting here. And for the school principal, it's very unfortunate that he, doesn't want to get his head around directed energy weapons, but he has a duty of care towards the children. So by doing what he did to Ramola, he basically admitted that he doesn't care about the children. Okay, so this is a dereliction of duty and the depraved indifference at best. Yeah, and I do not believe for a second that a school principal would be actually quite that quick. And actually the speed of action is something. It's a telltale sign for a criminal operation as well, because, for example, Hospital Erasmus took less than 24 hours to take away Melanie's baby. Less than 24 hours after birth, Hospital Erasmus in Brussels had kidnapped Melanie's baby, claiming that this was because they thought she was raging mad, even though the scientist who'd analyzed the synthetic implant from her throat was standing next to her bed. Now, no scientist, no doctor getting information would take such a drastic step within 24 hours, unless it's a foregone conclusion that the child is to be kidnapped. Similarly, when Ramola reported this to the school principal, I think he took less than 24 hours to report her to Child Protective
Services. Yeah.
And the speed of this decision means it's a foregone conclusion, in my view. I think this is smoking gun evidence that this guy knew exactly what he was doing. And any school principal who, upon hearing directed energy weapons, knows exactly what to do, to me, that indicates that he's in on it. Okay. So my base prior is not that this guy is a gibbering moron. My base prior is that this guy is a criminal. And he has been placed there a very long time ago. He has been trained up, and he's very likely part of the, whatever you want to call it, Illuminati, Masonic, crime cartel network. And I think he has been, I think Ramola said that he's the school principal is a fairly young guy. Now, someone being promoted to school principal at a very young age, okay, and I also seem to remember that in terms of school teaching of children, there are a lot of women. So when you have a young guy being promoted over all the other female teachers, to me that smacks somehow of some sort of promotion mechanism, and with that circumstantial evidence coming on top of what actually happened, I would say that what we're up against is potentially a guy who is at worst incorporated into the crime cartel. All
Well,
right.
there's a nepotism factor. I was reading what some of what Romola was saying, and there's quite definitely a nepotism factor in Quincy. So that shows you right there. They're looking out for each other at the cost of everybody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is something that we see over and over. There seem to be these well-oiled networks, family networks, and sometimes other male networking, mechanisms. And yeah, I think this is what we're up against. But people have to understand that what Romola is fighting is so much bigger than just her personal situation. It's the same with Melanie as well. She's fighting for so much more than just to get her child back. She's basically fighting the Brussels child trafficking rings, and Romola, I think, will might discover that something very similar is in action in Quincy. And and this is, I think, why it's so important that all the children at that school in Quincy, all the parents of those children actually start backing Romola and start informing themselves about what directed energy weapons are, and maybe also start listening to the episode where Millicent explained what's happening at the Mount Pleasant School in Tennessee. So yeah.
And people are saying, well, we've never heard of these things. Okay, are you a scientist, or have you been in the intelligence community? Then why would you have? Okay, get on the internet, look up directed energy weapons, and know that they exist. And they have been mobilized. They've been reduced to the size where you can have them in your cars and use them to shoot people in front or back. You can put them in backpacks. You can put them in large purses. They exist. And guess what? There is a select number of citizens in whatever country who are being given these weapons and being told, go ahead and murder a few of your neighbors. We'll pay you well, and we're just getting rid of excess people. Like excess people would be like excess shoes or excess, bricks that you just would throw away. How dare they? How dare they? And then these people say, oh, but my government said it's okay to murder my neighbor. No, nobody says that. No authority has that authority. So there's a moral depravity in these people that is inexplicable. And I've said, to me, it almost looks like this is a test to see where these mutants are, because we seem to be diverging from human beings into psychopaths and prey. And anybody who believes the government can come shine a badge at them, ooh, look at the shiny badge. I want you to murder some people for us. That person's an idiot and they're a psychopath. So I've said, when this whole thing breaks, and I want to see the head of the snake executed, but I wouldn't mind seeing the people who are going to plead, oh, but I didn't know, the government told me this. I wouldn't mind seeing them gotten rid of, put in a penal colony, or executed along with the people who decided this was a great idea, because they don't fit into society. They are toxic people, and their idea of elastic morality, I'm sorry, there's no place for it. It's black and white, whether you just walk over and kill your neighbor for profit or not. That's black and white. There is no gray area. There is no elastic morality. So, like I said, these people are absolutely totally unfit. And I guess I never am shocked by these stories. I'm never surprised to find out how bad people have gotten because of the last couple of years of hearing all these stories. There's just nothing they'll do. There's nothing they won't do. And that is a shocker, because you don't even think you're dealing with human beings, but I've called them counterfeits. They look like they're human, but they're not. If you can say, oh, I'm going to kill Mrs. Smith for a big screen TV. Yay me. I'm sorry, there is something wrong with you, not Mrs. Smith, So that's what Romola's run into. A little potentate in Quincy that they think that anybody who speaks up and has anything intelligent to say is a threat. So how sad is that? A year or two ago, there were people who started to say that smart children were too advantaged in school, and there ought to be something done about that. Well, what, a lobotomy? I mean, is that what we're really persecuting people for now? I mean, should Romola be forced to have a lobotomy, and then her child, oh goodness, her child is smart too. We have to figure out how to dumb her down too. Is that what society has become? We all have to come down to the lowest basic factor. We don't aspire to go as far up as we can. That's a crime. That's a sign of insanity. So we're going to take our very best people, say they're crazy, and put them away before they, God forbid, influence society. Because all we want are the brainless zombies. So this is a bad sci-fi movie, but unfortunately we're living it. And like I said, I'm starting to call these people also mutants, you know, because they just want everything to be caveman level, you know. And poor Romola. I mean, she's a very strong woman, and thank God that she's on our side, you know. But we need to support her as much as possible, because this is very important. She needs to be able to pound these people in the ground, you know, play whack-a-mole with them. And we need to support her as much as possible. And several people have written letters, and the more letters, you know, the better. But this is a way maybe to start getting it out into the public and start talking about her case. And I look forward to her being able to come on next week and fully explain it. But Cristofari, I think, is the principal, and then his father is something in with the school system too, nepotism. And I saw that with NSA security. All of a sudden, all these people are like, wait a minute, you know, Jim Smith, Tom Smith, John Smith, but wait a minute. So they had become a nepotistic little society. You know, that's very dangerous for any organization to have nepotism, because they're always looking out for each other. You know, we can't admit that happened, because God forbid that would make us look bad. It's like, you are bad. Okay? Take a hint. You are bad. So Quincy, take a hint. Okay? Smart people are not the enemy. So maybe you ought to regroup and make Cristofari the janitor, and try to get the smart people to look over the education of your children. Okay? That might be a good thing. So do please consider that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, talking about nepotism, now that you mentioned it, for example, when we were reporting the attacks on Millicent to Columbia Police, I noticed that the chief of police is Tim Potts, and the captain of the inspectors is Troy Potts. Are they related? I still have to check that. Is Troy Potts the son of Tim Potts? I don't know. You know, we have to check.
I think they're related to crackpots.
Yeah, well, that much we have established scientifically, I think, you know.
I think so.
And it's terrible. But you know, one of the things that has come out of me having to flee my place in Zurich is that now I'm staying with friends, and I'm in another country that I don't want to disclose yet. But one of the things I can tell you is that I was taken around a major city. And I'm saying this because it actually highlights what's going on. And also, I encourage people to do the same thing. So the friend said to me, look, you can't just be sitting there in front of your computer all day. Let's go and do a bit of sightseeing. So I was taken around the town. And because I'm so immersed in everything and I can't get it out of my head, I actually went around and I was photographing buildings. And I have to say, the place where we were, the cartel signaling was breathtaking. So I have seen a city that is essentially Masonic and satanic, with satanic symbolism and satanic heads prominently on buildings. And when I, last time I did sightseeing, I hadn't quite cottoned on to the greater meaning of this. But these buildings are all from the 19th century and stuff like that. And suddenly I began to comprehend the scale of this, and for how long this entire satanic and child trafficking and child sacrifice network has been ruling the world. I think that's another thing we have to really take in, because I ask people to, go around. If you're near a capital city, you for sure will have a field day doing this. But I think you can do the same thing in every major city of the world. It doesn't matter if you're in Europe or Latin America or Asia or in Africa, go around the city and look for especially the town hall and places like that, or the museum or anything, and look for statues of nude little boys, or for satanic heads, for Masonic obelisks, and the all-seeing eye. That will get you going. And then try to spot the pattern and try to see if these things point you in a certain direction. Because it is my hypothesis that this child trafficking that we're up against everywhere, in Brussels, in Hospital Erasmus, in Quincy, that's also tied into the targeting and the assault of women, and so the assault of women with directed energy weapons and the assault of children are interlinked, and also the assault of men and gay men and disabled people. Absolutely everything is interlinked. And it is one big organized crime cartel that is very old. But one of the things that I've now managed to map out is really, one sightseeing tour is enough. You can see that every major town hall, every museum, and the biggest and usually the richest hotels are in on it, because they will have prominently displayed the signs to all the insiders, pretty much how the Pizzagate scandal has brought to the fore that certain things, so, pizza means little girl and hot dog means little boy, and having pizza signs, scattered around town was actually discovered to be an insider sign that, okay, you can rape young girls here. We have, little girls that are on offer, and you can have sex with them, And that's what turned out of Pizzagate. And this ties into a much bigger pedogate. And it's basically the entire world waking up to this, that, oh my God, there's this huge child abuse and child sacrifice architecture underpinning the entire world. Okay, as horrible as that sounds. And this is why hospitals and Mount Pleasant School and Quincy School are so important, because those are the battle lines, people. Okay, that's why we fight this crime cartel, But I encourage you, if you don't believe me, go around your city and look for these signs, and try to figure out if you can see any satanic symbolism or Masonic symbolism that might indicate, might hint at child abuse, in major hotels. And the entire logic behind it is the following. When people travel around, let's say you have some dignitaries, say, go to another town, okay, you have to think about how the crime architecture actually works. But if you have dignitaries, say diplomats, or, some sort of politicians going to another town to make a business deal, the crime cartel or the cartel in the other town, has to do some sort of business dealing with them. And the way the crime cartel works is that you build trust between these men who are, to a great fraction, highly psychopathic and would gladly stab each other in the back. You build trust by getting them to engage in some sort of criminal activity together, so that they're in on it and that they have control files on each other. And it seems to be the case, based on what I've seen, that child sacrifice, the murder of children or the rape of children, having been abhorrent to, certainly the female part of the population for millennia, is a pretty good one. So you would get these guys together to rape a child and get them to produce witness evidence on each other. So should someone pull out of the deal, the criminal deal, you can get them based on the evidence and the witnesses, okay? I think this is how this entire thing works. But I think this is why, especially rich hotels and high-profile hotels, where, say, diplomats would have been staying and so on, in this hypothesis, would have children on offer, or maybe women to rape and mutilate on offer as well, And shockingly enough, I have found very fancy, flashy hotels with exactly that. It's also known that I know of certainly some hotels in Germany, for example, that have secret passages to brothels. Okay, Now, that's for obvious reasons. That's another business plan. You get these men who are staying away from their wives, you know, you give them access to prostitutes, big business. But these passages can also be used to, you know, go to a place where you can sacrifice a child to create these control files. And what was just so very shocking for me is to visit a town that a city I visited before, and actually now with the investigator hat on, discover massive satanic symbolism, pretty much spelling out the rape of women and children, you know, in the wall paintings, with almost arrows saying, you know, secret passage to child sacrifice chamber here, you know. And I encourage people to do the exercise. Don't just take my word for it. Just do it where you are. And, you know, try to think like Sherlock Holmes, if you like, and try to find the child trafficking rings, because chances are they are operational in the very same hotels they were operational in 200 years ago, you know. So that's an exercise for the reader. And then the other thing I would like to say is that when we see, for example, Millicent fight her battles, and Melanie and Ramola, and you, Karen, one of the things that we also have to remember is that we are all fighting the same crime cartel, but we're also fighting different incarnations of it, you know. So Millicent is, you know, fighting her perpetrator, who's also, you know, a pastor. He's got several incarnations, but he's also trying to infiltrate, and has infiltrated, her religious community. And, you know, you, Karen, are fighting these criminals in the intel agencies within NSA. Ramola is fighting it in the press. You know, she's going on about the subversion of the press, and now the crime cartel in the Quincy school. Melanie is fighting it, you know, in Hospital Erasmus for sure, you know, but she was also fighting it elsewhere. One of the things I would also like to start talking about more and more is the crime cartel in research, okay, at universities. And this has got two prongs that we need to start tackling. Prong number one is, of course, this thing that we all have body chips. And for example, Millicent and other people who measured the precise frequency of their body chips have discovered that these frequencies have been licensed by universities, by research universities. So guess who is using your bio information, guys? Okay, it's going to be some pretty big, flashy university. Now, the second branch of this, for example, my university, the University of Oxford in England, Dr. Stanninger wrote a book called The Global Brain Chip and Mesogens. And in the second paragraph of the introduction, she names Oxford as one of the leading blue sky research places for brain chips and mesogens. So you can have an educated guess who might have put the chips into me, you know? And this was an eye-opener for me. But then there's a second thing, which is something I haven't talked about, and that is the abuse I suffered as a student, as a PhD student, and as a researcher at Oxford. Okay, so number one is the research side of these universities, but number two is the fact that universities are where young people go, so also women, you know, in their late teens, and that is perfect to rape them, to sex traffic them, and so on and so on. Okay, and this is a topic that's very close to my heart, because one of the things I have not talked about is that, you know, I, as a university student, have been stalked by, you know, a group of men who I now recognize in retrospect to have been connected to MI5 and have been connected to this, you know, the trafficking rings all along. But it's only when I wrote my massive court case up that I actually connected the two things and all these memories in my head. But this is one thing. So I am now writing a witness testimony about the stalking networks in Oxford, which I believe to be connected to MI5. But I also suspect that they are trafficking women even worse than me. So I think there's a big undercurrent of sex trafficking of undergraduates also at Oxford happening. I would guess connected to MI5, but most definitely connected to these men who I have seen at Oxford stalk me. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I have more and more shocking reports of people saying that female undergraduates are, you know, basically prostituting themselves. Okay, So this is something that I also would like to bring up. And I think certainly in the UK, it has a very dark underside that's connected to the increase in the tuition fees. Okay, so the tuition fees when I went to Oxford were, so I think 2 years before I went to Oxford, there were no tuition fees, 0. And then came the Labour government and they introduced tuition fees. So by the time I went to university, I had to pay £1,000, but for a year. £1,000, but for an entire academic year, which for US situation is still cheap. But within a very short time, just a few years, £1,000 per year turned into £9,000 per year. Okay, so that's almost £10,000. That's almost a factor 10. And one of the first things I did when I started studying finance is to actually look at the university tuition fees and the debts that university students incur. Now, if you're doing a 3-year or 4-year course for masters, like I did, for example, you would end up with something like £40,000 debt. Okay. If you do a university course in medicine, you would end up, according to reports, with something between £60,000 and £80,000 in debt, just tuition fees. And I was trying to find to understand how much money that is. I was trying to find the most expensive car that has a listing price of £80,000. And not even a Porsche or Maserati has £80,000. So I had to, I think it's maybe it's a Ferrari 4x4. It's some sort of 4x4 that I found where the listing price is actually £80,000. So what has happened in the UK is that now we have one generation of university students who are leaving university. And remember, in the UK, every second person goes to university. And every university had these sort of tuition fees. So what this means is that suddenly in the UK, we have an entire generation of young people who are incurring debts that are the equivalent as if they had all bought themselves a luxury sports 4x4. Do we all think this is reasonable? No, it isn't. Most of them can't pay this back. And in fact, the government's own statistics say that they can't pay this back. Every second person will not pay off their student fees within their lifetime, which again in reverse means that they will spend their entire working lives paying their tuition fees, their debts. It's debt slavery. So the UK government has, through the back door, introduced debt slavery that will affect every second person in the UK in that generation, from that generation onwards. That's what it means. What it means in real terms on the street is that female students will start to prostitute themselves to pay for this. Okay, because prostitution is one of the most profitable things to get into. Actually, one of the things I used to say when I was a fellow at St. John's College is that if I were prostituting myself, I would be earning more than the college was paying me. That is just a statistic. Okay, so this is how, on one hand, how little St. John's paid me, but on the other hand, how profitable prostitution is. Okay, so with the introduction of tuition fees, I really think that there's a plan behind this. What the crime cartel achieved is that they put half of the UK, starting from a certain generation, half of the UK, and from that generation onwards, has been put into debt slavery permanently throughout their entire lives. And the second part is that they managed to recruit, half the population potentially as prostitutes. And guess who is running the prostitution rings? It's the crime cartel. It's the Crown Corporation, And this is the genius of the plan. And I am pretty sure that this is operational in Oxford. In fact, without my knowledge, without my, consent, I myself have been put into a sex trafficking ring. I've got chips in my genitals, okay? And somebody, perhaps Lord Sumption or whoever was stalking me, is using it on his mobile phone because I get raped every day. So I am already in sex slavery, guys, okay? So, and I only paid £1,000 of tuition fees. My tuition fees have been paid off, okay? But a lot of people will not pay them off. So this is a huge problem we're facing here, okay? But there's so much more. There's so much more I want to tell people about the university. And I don't know, Karen, do you have the patience and do you have the time that I make some revelations about St. John's College, because this is so important for the investigation. So if you can indulge me, I would like to actually talk about some things that have happened at St. John's College. And, I think a lot of really dark things are happening at elite universities. At Oxford, for sure, I've witnessed it myself. And I'm not just talking rape, I'm talking murder, I'm talking, actual mafia operations. I have already one case of a Black student who has reported something strikingly similar at Cambridge University. We know that there are victims from Harvard, and I think there's something much more systematic happening across the universities here that we need to tackle as investigators, and that we also need to tackle if you want to stop this entire crime cartel and the targeting of people, because I am pretty sure that it's connected to elite universities as well. Okay, so if you guys can indulge me, here goes. What I would like to start with, okay, I would like to share my screen, and I would like to explain something that I have hinted at in a previous interview. I would like to start with the website of St. John's College, okay? So St. John's College, Oxford, you can find them under www.sjc.ox.ac.uk. And this stands for St. John's College, Oxford, in, AC is academia in the UK. So this is my own college. That's the library that you can see here. Beautiful images. Okay, wonderful. On the surface, everything is lovely. We're taking, young, bright things every single year. I myself have been involved in admissions for physics in Oxford, undergraduate admissions, not for St. John's College, but for St. Hilda's College. Okay. I was asked to help with admissions. So for 2 years in a row, I myself have been interviewing students in physics, and so on and so on. And on the surface of it, everything is just fine. However, as soon as you start scratching under the surface, there are some things that reveal themselves. If you guys go to About the College here, you will see the wonderful old quad of St. John's College, Oxford here. If you're really trained, you might immediately pick up on Masonic or, cartel signaling, but let's not get into that in the architecture right now. I would like to approach it from a different angle. I would like to scroll down and start with the history of the college. Now, this is something that I have been totally oblivious to, okay? Because when I approached this college, I looked at the things that you will see here. It's the college life. This is the college chapel. Every college in Oxford has its own chapel, beautiful architecture. We have beautiful gardens, okay? So you can, I'm not sure if there are images of the gardens of St. John's College, but they're massive and they are very rich and very beautiful. I looked at things like the old library, okay, and what you can study, and so on, okay? So this is the sort of imagery that attracts undergraduates and has attracted me as an undergraduate, as a PhD student, and even as a fellow, okay? So it's all this old history and so on, and the beautiful libraries where you can study, and I spend an awful lot of time in the libraries, I can tell you that much, guys. But if you go back and you delve not into the beautiful images, but a bit into the history, so click on this tab for history, you already begin to see some evidence for darker things, but most people, me included, lack the actual history and insight and background into understanding just how dark the things are that are written here. So if you go to this website, now as an investigator, I already would start having a twitch in my eye as soon as I see the watermark, which shows a dragon sticking out its tongue and with a tail that looked like flames. Already the satanic symbolism is right here in the logo, but most people can't spot that. Now let's now get into the actual history of St. John's College. So the college is called the College of St. John the Baptist. So far, so good. St. John the Baptist, I I think, Karen, you have more of an idea who St. John the Baptist was. I had no idea, but, you know, so far so good. But now it says in the next sentence, this was, the college was founded in 1555 by Sir Thomas White, a wealthy London merchant tailor. Okay, so what the hell does that mean? Now, this is explained down here, okay? And it says in the second paragraph, Thomas White was master of the Merchant Tailors Company, one of the most illustrious livery companies in the city of London. Okay, he established a number of educational foundations, including the Merchant Tailor Schools. Okay, and the choice of name was significant. St. John was the patron saint of both the tailors and the Merchant Tailors Company. Most medieval colleges had been established by churchmen. St. John's was the first in Oxford to be founded by a merchant. Okay, now let's just digest this information, guys. St. John's College was founded by the Merchant Tailor Company, which is one of the most illustrious, read rich, livery companies of the City of London. So in other words, I now in retrospect discover that my college in Oxford has been founded by one of the richest guilds of the City of London Corporation. Okay, what this means is that my college has been founded by the global organized crime cartel. Okay, this is what it means. This is what I now understand it to mean. I was at Oxford for 12 years. Sorry, this is a massive gnat here flying. I was at Oxford for 12 years and I never understood that, but now it's clear as day. Okay, now the implications of this historical fact are massive, because I can tell you that 2 deaths occurred connected to St. John's College, and I at the time believed them to be connected to organized crime, and I now believe that these 2 deaths that I would like to talk to you about are deeply connected to targeting, and they're also deeply connected to the organized crime cartel that I call the Crown Corporation. Okay, and they were connected to St. John's College because St. John's College is connected to the crime cartel. Okay, and right, there we are. So what I would like to talk to you about is a bit more history before I delve into this, because in 2000, and the reason why I want to talk to you about this is because in the year 2010, at something called the Domus Dinner, one of the St. John's Fellows died. And I'm about to tell you that I believe it was murder. Okay, but before I can tell you the importance of that, you have to understand what the Domus Dinner is at St. John's College. Now, the Domus Dinner, Domus means the patron, or the patron of the house in Latin. Okay, or the Lord in Latin. And the Domus Dinner is the dinner of all the fellows of St. John's College, and it happens yearly, and it happens in Michaelmas term, which is the first of 3 terms at Oxford. It happens in October. Okay, that's the Domus Dinner. Now, the Domus Dinner is a dinner where we all wear our black gowns. So we all wear our fellows' gowns. It's a very formal dinner, but it's only for the fellows who are members of the college. And when I became a fellow of St. John's, I became one of these people. So I had to, go to the Domus Dinner. And at my very first Domus Dinner, this was in the year 2008 in October, 2 things happened. Well, many things happened at that Domus Dinner. I got to know all the fellows and all the, nice things. And I was suddenly at the 3rd level in the senior common room of the Oxford College. So in the year 2000, I became an undergraduate. I became a member of the junior common room at Hertford College. Then later, I became a member of the middle common room when I became a PhD student. And then in 2008, I became a fellow, and I saw, the 3rd level of the college, which is, being a fellow. And I thought that being a member of the senior common room was the 3rd and the highest level. And then later, years later, when I left Oxford, I discovered, no, there's a 4th level. And that's the Intel level. That's the people who are members of the Crown Corporation, or members who are or people who are members of MI5 and MI6. And that's the 4th level, which is operational in every Oxford college. But I never understood that. Okay, so when I became a member of St. John's College, the senior common room, I thought, hey, I made it. I'm now part of the insiders, you know. I'm now part of the fellows, and it was a very joyful occasion. And the 2 things that happened at my very first Domus dinner that are hugely important, actually, as I now discover, is number 1, the dinner consisted of 2 parts. Number 1, is the first part where all the new fellows sat at high table. That's the an elevated bit of the dining hall where all the fellows sit. But at the Domus dinner, there are so many fellows that not everybody sits at high table like normally. So I sat at high table for the first time. But in the second part of the dinner, I sat in the rest of the hall, all filled with fellows. And in the second part of the dinner, I sat next to a fellow called Gudrun Loftus, who exactly 2 years later, at the Domus dinner in 2010, died. And I think she was murdered at St. John's College. I thought that she was murdered at the time, and now I'm pretty sure she was murdered. She didn't die naturally, but she died at the Domus dinner in 2010. And I met her at the Domus dinner. She sat next to me at the Domus dinner in 2008. Now, I bring this up because people need to know that what has been written in the press is a massive cover-up, I think. I have been certainly, I met Gudrun Loftus myself, and I have not been quite an eyewitness to her death, but I have been a witness who has witnessed things happening at St. John's College around her death that are relevant. So this is why I would like to talk about this publicly. And the more I get to know about what's happening at St. John's College and other things in the world, the more I think that this has bigger implications, and that Gudrun Loftus died because she was pretty much like Gareth Williams. She had a much bigger importance. And I also think that she was connected to intelligence, and I never knew that at the time. Now, okay, so the first event in 2008 at the Domus dinner was that I sat next to Gudrun Loftus, and a little voice in my head now, knowing what I know about the crime cartel, worries that it might actually have been set up all along. Gudrun Loftus died at the Domus dinner, and heck, I found out that I'm chipped, and I might have been chipped by Oxford. In fact, I'm pretty sure I was chipped while I was at Oxford. And Oxford seems to be doing brain research connected to British intelligence. And, I do worry that there might be more things arranged, for example, like the seating plan at St. John's College. So maybe it wasn't a coincidence that I sat next to her. Maybe it was, maybe a lot of things weren't coincidence at Oxford. But anyway, there we are. These are the facts. So that's number 1 you need to know. Number 2 that you need to know that also has global implications is that at the Domus dinner in 2008, I took part in something that every fellow at the Oxford colleges, takes part in, who becomes a fellow, and that is called the Loving Cup. Okay, it is the ritual of the Loving Cup at St. John's College. Now, when you actually start researching that, you pretty quickly discover that the Loving Cup is something that goes straight back to the liveries of the City of London, okay? But it also goes straight back to the medieval ages, and even before that, to the Knights of St. John's, okay? And if you listen to Sean Frost, the South African historian who is in Switzerland, you will also discover that the Knights of St. John's, who have been kicked out of Jerusalem, are also tied to Switzerland. In fact, he says that Switzerland has been given to them because they were these marauding hordes coming back from Jerusalem, and people were afraid of them, and they were afraid that they will start looting and pillaging like medieval armies used to do. So they were given Switzerland to just calm the hell down, and then also to protect the wealth stolen by the Vatican and transported back from Jerusalem. So this kind of is the historical background why Switzerland has all these underground bunkers, and why it's traditionally the place of all the banks and all the vaults, because since the 13th century, they've been guarding loot. you know. And since the 13th century, there were a bunch of marauding mercenaries in the employ of the Vatican, which also in one fell swoop explains why the Swiss guards are guarding the Vatican, okay, traditionally, and have been for the last 800 years. So that's the connection between the Vatican, between Switzerland, the Knights of St. John, and, you know, as I now discovered, the City of London Corporation being, I would say, a front of the Vatican crime cartel, and the City of London livery companies, you know, setting up St. John's College. It shows you kind of this link, and then St. John's College still having the ritual of the loving cup, going back to the Knights of St. John's, kind of gives you the image that stuff is still happening at St. John's. But it gets a bit more interesting than that. And now it gets also a bit disgusting, because the loving cup or loving cup is still slang for woman's vagina, okay? And that's just a fact. But then the ritual of the loving cup consists of this huge chalice. I think if I remember correctly, it's silver, but it's this massive chalice being filled with red wine, okay? And then it's passed around the dining hall. And there's this weird ritual where two people face each other, and one person drinks from the loving cup and then passes it to the other. And then the second person drinks from the loving cup. But then people around these two people also have to stand up, because they represent the knights who were, you know, kind of watching out for their mate as they were doing the ritual of the loving cup, making sure that none of the other knights stabbed them in the back or stuff like that. Okay, so that kind of also tells you that this band, you know, the Knights of St. John's were a bunch of mercenary, psychopathic serial killers, you know, and they were also not that, well, how to say, they would have gladly put a dagger into each other's back given half a chance, why you needed to have this whole thing of, you know, knights guarding each other. Okay. But it tells you, the ritual of the loving cup tells you so much more, actually. Number one, it tells you that this is a ritual done by mercenaries, by mercenary, you know, armies, by psychopathic serial killers who were not that, you know, close to each other, and who needed rituals to be kept together. Now, that also tells you that the loving cup and the red wine in the loving cup also represents blood. Okay, it might be the blood of the people they, you know, killed in battle. It could also mean the blood of the children or women whom they have sacrificed in their rituals that make them stick together, that create the control files with which they kind of, you know, hold the lever over each other. Now, the fact that, you know, loving cup is to this day slang for vagina, and red wine represents blood, very quickly leads on to this whole idea that the loving cup ritual is actually a ritual that's, you know, symbolizes perhaps the blood of women who have been raped and then ritually murdered, or maybe young women, as in children, you know, or female babies, and so on. But I'm sure male babies also. So, okay, so what I'm telling you here is that I discovered that I took part in this. It wasn't in a somehow in the back room of St. John's College. No, every single fellow at St. John's College takes part in this loving cup ritual, and it's presented as something quaint and historic that we all do. And then the more I read, the more I discovered, hang on, no, what I took part in is actually a really, really dark ritual that is connected to satanic sacrifice. Okay, that goes back to the Vatican and the Knights of St. John at St. John's College. And that's the point where you really start wondering who the hell you have been working with at St. John's College. Okay, so I can tell you that this loving cup ritual is done at, I think, at several colleges. It's also done in the City of London, in the livery companies, and I think it's even done in other places of the British government, and I think it might be done around the world. But the reason why you really need to know about this is because it is a historical trace of this child abuse and child sacrifice happening around the world. And it's the first glimpse at the fact that, you know, ritual abuse might be happening in Oxford colleges. Now, I'm not saying that the ritual of the loving cup immediately means that, you know, people are being raped and murdered at St. John's, but it hints at this tradition that stuff like that was happening in the past. Okay, right. So this is the background. But should we reach a stage where we maybe discover that St. John's College is, say, connected to the intelligence agencies, this stuff is really, really, really important, because it shows you the entire historical trace and how everything hangs together. And if you remember in the last episode, we talked about, in the last and the second to last, we talked, you know, Ramol and I, we were discussing this video clip from Sir John Scarlett, head of MI6, saying himself, everything leads to everything else. There has never been a break. That's what's so special. Okay, so there's a direct link between all these historic events and what might be happening at St. John's right now, or might be happening in British intelligence right now. Okay, but now this is the background story, and now let's get on to the deaths at St. John's College, which are hugely relevant. And I'm saying all this basically as a witness to what has happened, and I'm inviting other investigators to come in, and other, you know, maybe white hat intelligence agents, and find out what exactly has happened and what has happened to these people in particular, and how this might be connected to targeting and what's happening around the world. Okay. Because I also suspect, I don't have insider information on that particularly, but I have circumstantial hints that imply that, for example, the death of Gareth Williams might have been connected to the death of Gudrun Loftus at St. John's College. It is possible, but I think this is really important. Okay, but now let me tell you what happened to Gudrun Loftus. Okay, so I hope this still works, but if you let me share my screen and see what comes up. Okay, so that we do this together. This is really important, guys. Okay, so if you go to Google or another search engine, type in Gudrun Loftus. Okay, here's the obituary of oh my goodness, here, look, Wikispooks already has a link. Gareth Williams, Gudrun Loftus Access. Okay, so there's more people you know, investigating this. So let's look at the obituary, and let's look at the report in the Telegraph. Okay, the Daily Telegraph. So this was Gudrun Loftus here, and as you can see, there's an article on the Telegraph, says police investigate death of Oxford Don at St. John's College. Okay, and they say police officers are investigating the death of an Oxford University lecturer who was found unconscious at the foot of the college's spiral staircase. Gudrun Loftus, 52, a German tutor and author, was found on Tuesday morning near the senior common room at St. John's College in the city. A post-mortem found that she died of multiple injuries consistent with a fall. Thames Valley Police said the death was being treated as unexplained and that the investigation is ongoing. Blah, 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 and so on and so on. But I can tell you that the upshot was that Gudrun Loftus was said to have died of natural causes, and her death was pronounced an accident in the end by Thames Valley Police. Now, let me tell you what I know about the death of Gudrun Loftus, because this is super important. Gudrun Loftus, I was told by the fellows when I came into college, was found at the bottom of a spiral staircase inside the senior common room. Okay, so St. John College consists of, the senior common room has got two entrances. You go up a flight of stairs, and then you get, sorry, these are massive gnats here. You get into the senior dining room, okay? And when you're inside the dining room, it's kind of connected from these two entrances, but in one end there's a staircase and it leads up to guest rooms, okay, upstairs. And then in the guest rooms, you can stay overnight if you're fellow, and fellows do stay overnight at the Domus dinner. And this is also what happened. So Gudrun Loftus lived outside of Oxford, and she stayed. She had booked herself into the guest room the night of the Domus dinner. Okay. Now, the first thing I knew is that I got an email. And sorry, Karen, you have to listen to all this, but it is really important.
It's awful. It's awful.
It is absolutely awful, but what's even more awful is that the college, I think, has covered up what has happened. So the first thing I knew about this is that we came back from CERN. So my husband and I were working at CERN, and we traveled back at the beginning of the term. And this is also why I was in Oxford, because it was the start of term, and that's exactly when the Domus dinner is happening. So we traveled back, but because we were traveling and we had a house move, I didn't actually attend the Domus dinner myself that year. And the first thing I discovered was about this was an email from the principal saying, we're really sorry to tell you that Gudrun Loftus has died. And then the next paragraph said, we are forbidding everybody from talking to the press. Okay, so no word about the press, about this death to the press. Okay, so that already makes you think, you know, why? What is there to be said to the press? But anyway, so then a day later, or 2 days later, I went into college and I was trying to find out from the fellows what had happened. And the first thing I noticed is that everybody was super reluctant to talk about this, and everybody seemed to be really scared. Okay, so that's already really suspicious. So no one was really willing to tell me what has happened. But what I got to know from, you know, people I spoke with is that Gudrun Loftus was found at the bottom of the stairs in the middle. So it's a kind of like a windy staircase on the outside, and she was found in the middle. And the theory was that she fell across the railing and fell, you know, basically down and injured herself at the bottom of the stairs. And one of the things I know is that she didn't die instantly. She seemed to have injuries that implied that, you know, she had some, so she got injured, but she stayed alive, potentially for a longer period of time. And then she passed away. Okay, now the official theory that I think the police settled on, and that certainly the college settled on, and that most certainly all the fellows settled on who I spoke to at St. John's College, is that Gudrun Loftus, so she was seen to go up to the guest room at the end of the dinner. So there's a dinner, there's drinks afterwards, and people stay around in the senior common room talking. And a group of fellows saw her, you know, say goodbye to everybody and walk up to her room in the evening. And then, yeah, that's it. The fellows left, and then the next morning, Gudrun Loftus was found, I think, unconscious at the bottom of the stairs with injuries. She was taken to hospital and she died. And then people tried to reconstruct what happened. And the theory that everybody settled on is that she went up to her room, went to bed, and for some reason in the middle of the night, she came downstairs again. And this is now it. For some reason, she came downstairs. She went upstairs again, and at the top of the stairs, there's a really heavy fire door, you know, a fire protection door. And opening that fire door, she fell across the railing, across the, you know, the barrier of the stairs, and fell down in the middle. Okay, so this is the theory. Unfortunately, this explanation is physically impossible. And the reason why it's physically impossible is because Gudrun Loftus was extremely short. When I met her at St. John's College on the Domus dinner in 2008, at the end of the dinner, when she stood up and we said goodbye, the first thing that I was struck by is just how short she was. She was wearing killer stiletto heels, you know, and she was still barely reaching my chest. So this woman was extremely short. It would be pretty hard for me to fall over the barrier, but for someone her height, even wearing stiletto heels and slipping, it's still physically impossible to fall over the barrier. So there's no way Gudrun Loftus could have possibly fallen over the barrier. It is physically impossible. So it leaves two possibilities. She was either thrown or she never fell. She was actually injured by somebody else at the bottom of the stairs, as in she was murdered, okay, or severely injured and she died of injuries, okay. Now, there's a second part of this, which is this theory of the fall. This is also pretty impossible because, as it turns out, another fellow was staying in the other guest room, and this person never woke up. She never, or he never heard the fall. I said she by accident because I was trying to deduce who it might have been, and I settled on the fact that it might have been a woman I know. And if I'm right, and if that's the woman, I'm pretty sure she didn't murder Gudrun Loftus, and I'm also pretty sure that she would have woken up had a human body fallen down the stairs. Okay, so there's another part of this. Once I was staying up in the top floor, there's also like a public room, and one of the people, one of the SCR, so I think the SCR, the helper of the SCR butler, because yes, St. John's College does have butlers, was taking down a crate of drinks into the the basement of the senior common room, and dropped the case of drinks, and it kind of fell down a couple of stairs, but the bang was so loud that I almost flew out of my chair, out of the sofa from fright on the 3rd floor, because the actual wall that is supporting all these floors is connecting right with the ground floor. So the actual bottom of the floor and the supporting wall is connected, and is connecting every single room. So because of this personal experience, I would say it is physically impossible for a human body to fall down 3 flights of stairs or 3 floors without people on the top floor hearing it, literally without them flying out of their bed. So for me, that means that it is physically impossible that Gudrun Loftus fell down the stairs or, in the barrier. This possibility is just not on the cards. And what it actually means is that Gudrun Loftus did not fall. She was also not thrown. She never fell. Gudrun Loftus must have been, seriously injured at the bottom of the stairs, which means, based on her injuries, that somebody hurt her. Somebody hurt her with the intention of killing her, and somebody left her there to die. Okay. And what this means is that the people from college who said that she fell, they covered up her murder. Okay, that's what it means. And now the question is why? Why does St. John's College cover up the murder of Gudrun Loftus? Okay, and this leaves 2 possibilities. Number one, they actually have reason to believe, or they know that one of the fellows did it. And this fellow seems to be protected by some secret level, maybe connected to the City of London. Or the second possibility is that Gudrun Loftus was murdered, just like Gareth Williams, by Anglo-Saxon intelligence, more precisely by British intelligence, which again connects to this hidden side of St. John's College. But, fact of the matter is that Gudrun Loftus, in my view, and based on what I've seen, has been murdered at St. John's College, and her murder has been covered up. And one of the things that people need to know is that Gudrun Loftus was not just a German teacher, a German tutor, she was a linguist. She was teaching several languages, okay, which again makes her prime candidate, to have worked in intelligence, and there are other details. So in other words, what I'm trying to say to people is that an intelligence agent might have been murdered at St. John's College, literally meters from me, because I didn't actually, I lived, I think, a 5-minute walk from where she was murdered. Okay, so that's the first murder. And then the second murder, which I ask everybody to investigate, is the following one. And I'm not going to say anything more because we need to close here. But let me just find this.
Yeah,
yes.
I have to go to an appointment. I'm sorry.
Exactly. So I'm just going to flash this up for next time. I would like people to actually investigate this themselves. Because this is super important. I would like everybody to investigate the death of the Oxford University professor, Stephen Rawlings. Okay. So Stephen Rawlings. I think Stephen Rawlings was also murdered, but he was not murdered by the person in whose presence he died, I don't think. So he died in the presence of Devinder Sivia, a fellow at St. John's College. But I actually think that he was murdered with covert weaponry, So again, that's an Oxford physicist, right? Who died at the house of a St. John's College fellow. But I don't think the St. John's College fellow has anything to do with this. But there we are, people. So I think this is how it's all connected. So you know, I think we can close here, and I'm asking all the investigators, all the white hat investigators out there, to actually look into these two cases, because I'm pretty sure that they are connected to the targeting. So this is why I needed to say this. And I think it's also opening the door on the involvement of these research universities and so-called elite universities in targeting and in intelligence work, and in the work that's connected to the organized crime cartel. So thank you for listening, Karen, and thank you for listening to everybody out there. So do you have anything to say in closing, Karen?
Well, just a lot's going on, and I'm kind of stunned by some of your revelations, but I think more and more is coming out the further into this year we go. So people, hang on. It's going to be a wild ride. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Please, hang on, and please help us with the investigation. And all the whistleblowers out there who know stuff about these deaths, or maybe about other deaths, please come forward, because we really need to wrap this up, internationally, everywhere. And Intel cannot do it by themselves. They have proven that they cannot. The police cannot do it. We need the eye of the public to help reveal all this. Okay, so that's the episode today. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for waiting for us for an hour. Next week, Ramola and Millicent should be there, so stay tuned. And meanwhile, oh gosh, I have to go in because these nuts are eating me. Tonight, I will try to finish the short version of the affidavit template, and then I invite everybody's comments. Okay, so thank you for listening, and bye for now, and see you next week.
Bye.